dreams that that you had you you could you want you could do so you want him to do you so much you could do anything.
Hi guys, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Welcome to my video presentation with Binti Roifatasiyam in here. I'm so happy to meet you guys. Did you see my opening? Yeah, I purposely put that in my opening because I want all my audience, all my viewers or my listener enjoy this video. I know I don't have that golden voice, but I really hope you enjoy my video presentation and don't disturb by my voice. Today my presentation title is Teaching Listening Skills. Yeah, for TEFL class. So without any further ado, let's get to it. The first is content. For this presentation, there are many contents that consist and will talk in this video. The first is learning objective, the second is introduction, the third is historical perspective, fourth, what make a good listening text, and the next is authentic versus non-authentic listening materials, and then next is listening sources, and the next is micro and micro listening skills, and the next is listening sub-skill, and the next is approaches to listening, bottom up and top down, and then the next is stages in teaching listening skill, and the last is current trends in teaching listening skills. First is learning objective. On successful understanding, learners will able to first understand the key components of listening skills, and then is have an insight into the historical development of listening skill. The next is have a basic comment on the stages of listening skill, and then analyze source text for listening activity, and the next is aware of the approaches to listening skill, and then the next is foresee the current trend in listening skill, and the last is link the theory and practice in the teaching of listening skill. Next is introduction. Listening is an active and interactional process in which a listener receives speech, sound, and tries to attach meaning to the spoken words. The listener tries to understand the intended message of the oral text to respond effectively to oral communication. Listening and hearing are considered different process. While hearing is considered as physical, passive, and natural process, listening is physical and mental, active and learned process and defined as skill. Noonan 1997 called the listening skill as the Cinderella skill, which is overlooked by its elder sister speaking in language learning. Listening received little attention in language teaching and learning because teaching method emphasized productive skill and listening was characterized as passive activity. Some variation definition of listening are presented, such as listening is the process of receiving, constructing meaning from, and responding to spoken and or non-verbal messages by Powell 2002. And the next is listening is an active, purposeful process of making sense of what we hear. Helgesen 2003. And listening comprehension is a highly complex problem-solving activity that can be broken down into a set of distinct sub-skills. Binus 1984. Next is historical perspective. More than a century ago, as a dominant method of language teaching, grammar translation gave no importance to listening skill because the aim was to read and translate scientific texts from target language, mostly Latin, to native language. Then there was a paradigm shift from written language to oral skills with the emerged of the direct method. In the second half of the 20th century, audiolingual method emphasized the importance of listening skill and gave priority to oral proficiency. There were abundant use of language laboratories, tape, cassettes to achieve native-like pronunciation. During 70s, alternative methods were proposed by various researchers. Listening skill was given prominence as the common characteristic of this method. According to Crescent's input hypothesis 1985, learners could learn best by exposure to comprehensible input which was likely beyond their current level of competence. And Crescent pointed out the second language learner was similar to first language acquisition. Thus, listening was the first step on the way language proficiency. Similarly, in his Total Physical Response, Asser stated that oral language was primarily to written language and listening comprehension should precede speech production. He also emphasized that learners were supposed to listen and obey the order given by instructor through action. In communicative language teaching was based on view of language as communication, and listening was the most prevailing part of daily life communication. And the next is what makes a good listening text. Listening comprehension is an extremely important part of language learning phenomenon. Therefore, we need to question the property of a good listening text for language learning classes. There are various factors affecting a listening text quality, but in common, we can divide the quality of the text into two categories. They are content and delivery. As from content, the listening text should firstly be interesting for audiences. It is important to know your target student profile because what interests one group of learners might seem dull for another group. In listening class, pre-task activity actually serve the aim of arousing interest in student before the main activity. But if the aim to understand a listening text, then any possible culturally based meaning in the text should be understandable for the target group. Density of the listening text also influence the listening text quality. If the text include repetition of key term, words, and phrases, it will be less demanding for listeners. In addition, the more complex grammatical structure the text include, the more demanding it will be for listener. In addition to content, how you present the material is equally important in the term of delivery. Important factors include length, quality of the material, accent, and the method of delivery. The listening text should be delivered in a non-destructive manner that is suitable for the target group of learners. This is authentic versus non-authentic listening material. In the selection of the right listening material for language classroom, the distinction between authentic and pedagogic material should be highlighted. They both have advantages and disadvantages depending on your target group and the aim of the activity. Authentic material can be texts which are prepared by native speaker and are not originally intended as a language learning materials. Authentic material can often include more unfamiliar use of language, and mostly it can be difficult for learners to cope it. If the teacher wants to use authentic material, he or she should write a lesson plan based on the material and find appropriate supporting material. And the next is listening sources. Various listening sources can be used in language classroom. These are teacher talk, student talk, guest speaker, textbook recording, TV, video, DVD, radio, songs, and the internet. Technological improvement have increased the type of listening resources in recent years. Both teacher and student can access listening material easily via the internet. The computer and interactive technology allow teachers to select materials of all kinds, support them as learners need to dictate, and use the visual option of screen presentation or the interactive capability of computer control to help students develop good listening technique. The next is macro and micro listening skills. Brown 2007 offer a simplified list of micro skill and macro skills for conversational listening. The macro skill isolate those skills that relate to the discourse level of organization, while those that remain at sentence level continue to be called micro skill. So, for example, for macro skill, recognize cohesive devices in spoken discourse. And then next is recognize the communicative function of utterance according to situation, participants, and goals. And the next is inverse situation, participants' goal using real world knowledge, pragmatic competence. And the next is distinguish between literal and implied meaning. And of course, there are others macro skill, and you can read on my paper. And for micro skill, it's like retain chunk of language different length in short-term memory. And the next is discriminate among the distinctive sound of English. And the next is recognize English stress patterns, words in stress and unstressed position, arithmetic structure, international contours, and their role in signaling information. And the next is recognize reduced form of words. And the next is distinguish word boundaries, recognize the core of words and interpret word order pattern and their significance. And there are still a lot of other micro skill, and for further reading you could read on my paper. And the next is listening sub-skill. There are various types of listening sub-skill to help listener make sense of the listening text. Most commonly used listening sub-skill in language classroom, such as listening for gist, listening to get general idea. And the next is listening for specific information, listening just to get specific piece of information. And the next is listening in detail, listening to every detail and try to understand as much as possible. And the next is listening to infer, listening to understand how listener feels. And the next is listening to question and responding, listening to answer and question. And the last is listening to description, listening for a specific description. Is approaches to listening, bottom up and top down. For bottom up, if listeners use linguistic knowledge, clues such as phonemes, syllables, words, phrases, and sentences to understand, it means that they use a bottom strategy. And top down, if they use context and prior knowledge such as topic, genre, culture, and other SIM knowledge stored in long-term memory to decide the meaning they use, is a top-down strategy. For example, the first, you are chatting with your friend and she tells you a story about an exam that she failed. You listen to your friend to say something that will console her. And the next is one evening, a friend of yours calls and invites you to her birthday party. You carefully take note of the address, time, and day of the activity. In the first situation, we just listen to understand the main idea and give the expected social response. However, in the second situation, we need to listen carefully and understand the actual words in order to have a problem later. And the next is stages in teaching listening skill. Vandergriff 1999 divided listening skill into three stages as pre-listening, while listening, and post-listening, and each of three stages has its own specific purpose. For pre-listening activities help to hear and give some clue about the activity's expectation, mostly by activating schemata. Imagine that you entered the classroom a little bit late and you see that the teacher has already started lecturing. most probably it will be difficult for you to grasp the topic and understand what is going on. Why do you think this happened? As you do not know the context and you do not have any prior knowledge about the context will instantly be increasable. Consequently, pre-listening activities serve the goal of ensuring students know what they need to know before they listen. Listeners need to know things like the speaker way of thinking, the length of the text, the listener rules, information about the topic, specialized vocabulary, and the relationship between listener and speaker. And the next is while listening. While listening is activities are directly related to the listening task and student perform the tasks either during the listening process or immediately after the listening. Therefore, the teacher need to match the activity to the instructional goal, the listening purpose, and the student proficiency level. And the next is post listening. Underwood 1989 described the post-listening task as an activity that is realized after the listening, merging all of the work performed. Post-listening tasks may be directly related to the pre and while listening activities, or they can just be loosely related to these activities. She also asserted that post-listening tasks require more time than the other tasks because students deal with thinking, discussion, reflecting, and writing process. It can be named as the more reflective part of lesson checking and summarizing. Is one activity type that can be performed as post-listening tasks. And the last is current trends in teaching listening skill. As a result of the new trend, the focus has also shifted to the comprehension of detail and the keys of messages that have communicative purposes. In other words, text-oriented instruction, which consists of decoding skill, imitation, and memorization of sound and grammar patterns, discriminating sound, and answering comprehension questions based on a listening passage, give way to communicative and learner centered instruction. Learner listen for two purposes as comprehension and acquisition. While listening to listen comprehension involve enhancing comprehension abilities in understanding the language process. Listening to learn acquisition involve creating new meaning and from linking and then repeating the meaning and for linking this help learners to be ready for paying more attention to the syntax and lexis of the language through listening. Therefore, teachers should view listening skill as kind of enhancement to language acquisition rather than comprehension. Okay, I think that's all for me. First, I want to say thank you very much for having patient listening my voice and listening this material. And the second is I want to say so sorry if you find this video is a very uninteresting on or you find this video is so boring or you found that I have so many mispronunciation. Please correct me. Or the way I present it is so dull maybe. So yeah, I want to say I'm so sorry for that. And if you have any question, don't feel hesitate to ask. Okay, once more, thank you so much, guys. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye.